I'm glad to be here. Thank you to John Mitchell, and many thanks to Petra. And I loved hearing some of the things that were said here, which certainly echoed with me. And I've just written some of this so as to organize it. I do think that there are many things that make us the teachers that we become. Obviously, the people we meet and books we read. Obviously, our own experience as students. All of those help shape our future classrooms. But the evolution of knowing how to teach mightn't always be a smooth process. Certainly was not with me. When I think of what did guide me, I think of something less predictable and less orthodox. I was born in Ireland, a small country that struggled to emerge as a nation, and many people there, because of simple economic hardship, were educated well below the level of their ability. They simply had to leave school too early. But though I knew that, I also knew that many people in Ireland, despite that, found their own way to literature. One evening on radio in Ireland, I heard a man from the west of the country say that he'd left school at 14, but that he had memorized hundreds and hundreds of lines of poetry in the Irish language. And he said it to himself as he worked around his farm. His words just made me aware of my own potential conflict about learning and teaching. I was sure that what drew that man to those poems was not simply his literacy. I was certain that it was his own creativity. But I worried that the old conservative methods of education, still broadly accepted when I was young, just didn't give weight to a student's creativity. A classroom without a place in it for a student's creativity just did not seem to me a place where I would teach with comfort or conviction. Now, I teach a class at Stanford called Poetry and Poetics. It's a class where students have a very mixed background in poetry. Some of them really have no knowledge of it. Some of them have quite a bit of knowledge of it from the AP classes in high school. Some take the class because it's a requirement for the English major. Some of them are math majors, bio majors, science majors, and they take it because they still want to be close to language and to literature. Now, in that class, I teach poetry out of the 17th and 18th century as well as the 20th. And the poems are inevitably going to be in a context that often students will find themselves really struggling with, will find it hard. And I understand their difficulty. But I think of myself as teaching not just poetry, but access to poetry. And I'm sure that what opens the path for a student is what makes the poem approachable for them is this. Before they can study a poem in my class, before they can say to me, that's a good poem or a historic poem, they need to be able to say to themselves, that could be my poem. If they think it can become their own poem, almost any structure of learning is welcome to them. If they don't think that, then hardly any structure of learning is possible. Claiming the poem for themselves is what engages their creativity, and it makes that classroom experience stronger. There's a rich conversation at Stanford going on about all this really right now. With our arts initiative and our creative expressions, which we follow in creative writing, we now have a structure with which to implement our conviction that a student's creativity, as well as being an integral part of who they are as a person, is also a valuable, powerful teaching tool. And I think this ends up with optimism. In the creative writing program, my colleagues, both the faculty and our truly brilliant lecturers, really don't see the humanities as declining. The very opposite. We are certain that we see the emergence of a new humanist, not a history major necessarily or a literature major, but a math major, a pre-med, a computer scientist. And we think it is time for the humanities to integrate and not to separate. And we're glad at Stanford that we have the chance in that program to show students that they don't, in order to follow their chosen or life discipline, have to give up the dream of their creativity that will last them through that life. So we were meant to have one sentence that was a takeaway. And what I tell my students would be, if it's a poem and it's yours for your lifetime. Thank you.